Have you ever watched your own blood relative sign a legal document that stripped you of every single dollar you earned over a decade, while looking you dead in the eye and telling you it was just business? I did. My name is Ethan Cross. For 11 long, grueling years, I was the chief structural surveyor and head soil mechanics engineer for Cross Developments. My older brother, Marcus, was the public face of the empire. He was the one who wore the custom-tailored charcoal suits, the one who did the glossy magazine interviews about urban architecture, and the one who drove the pristine, matte black Porsche around our coastal construction sites. But I didn't live in the light. I lived in a high-visibility vest, heavy rubber boots, and a mud-covered hard hat. I spent 16 hours a day out in the elements, hanging off the sides of cliffs, calculating load-bearing tolerances, soil compaction coefficients, and seismic vulnerabilities. Our father had built this company from nothing, using nothing but a second-hand excavator, and a simple, unshakable promise to his 2 sons. When I stepped down, he used to tell us, over the grease-stained blueprints on our kitchen table, it's a perfect 50-50 split. Marcus builds the brand, but Ethan holds up the stone. But corporate greed has a funny way of erasing family history. On October 12th, our father suffered a massive, catastrophic ischemic stroke, leaving him completely unresponsive, in a medically induced coma at St. Jude's Hospital. The doctors told us to prepare for the worst, but Marcus didn't spend the night praying in the waiting room. Less than 48 hours later, before the electronic medical charts were even fully processed, Marcus called an unannounced, closed-door, emergency board meeting at our corporate headquarters. When I walked into the top-floor boardroom, I didn't see blueprints on the long mahogany table. I didn't see our father's old leather notebook. I saw 3 high-priced corporate restructuring lawyers from London and a single glass of ice water sitting in front of a lone, empty chair. Marcus didn't even look up from his tablet when I sat down. He didn't ask how our father was doing. He didn't mention the hospital. "Ethan," he said, his voice smooth, perfectly practiced, and entirely devoid of human warmth. "The board has voted to aggressively streamline our operational assets before breaking ground on the coastal project. To put it bluntly, your specialized position as head of field surveying has been made completely redundant." I stared at him through the silence, the sound of my own pulse ringing loudly in my ears. "Marcus, I spent the last 18 months of my life designing the entire foundation grid for that valley," I said. He let out a soft, patronizing sigh, tapping his platinum wedding band against his fountain pen. "You're a brilliant dirt technician, Ethan, truly, but you simply don't possess the macro-scaling vision for where I'm taking this firm. Sign the voluntary severance. We've graciously allocated you a piece of family property, so you aren't left on the street." The property they handed me was Sector 7, a jagged, windswept, completely barren rock ridge on the highest peak of the northern cliffs. To the board's expensive lawyers, it was a worthless patch of gray granite that couldn't support a single home. To Marcus, it was a cruel, public insult to ensure I left with nothing. But as I picked up the heavy pen to sign away my life's work, I realized something critical. Marcus was a master of marketing, but he was absolutely, profoundly terrible at mathematics. To truly understand the depth of my brother's arrogance, you have to understand the layout of the northern cliffs. Cross Developments had just acquired 80 acres of prime coastal land directly below my rock ridge. Marcus planned to build the Vanguard Crest, a massive 12-story luxury glass hotel worth £45 million. The architectural renderings were stunning. The hotel was designed to step down the steep slope of the valley, offering the wealthiest tourists in the country a seamless, uninterrupted view of the Atlantic Ocean. When Marcus tossed me the deed to Sector 7, he thought he was throwing a scrap of bone to a stray dog. He thought he was locking me out of the family wealth for the rest of my life. I packed my surveying gear, my digital coordinate monitors, and my deep resonance laser levels into my truck that night. I drove out to Sector 7 alone, as a freezing northern gale whipped salt spray against the sheer cliff face. I spent 4 hours in the pitch black, running a deep resonance subterranean radar scan of the granite ridge. When the data finally finished compiling on my rugged field laptop, I let out a long, quiet laugh that was swallowed by the waves. The legal boundary line of Sector 7 didn't just cover the flat top of the ridge. Because of an ancient, unrevised maritime coastal charter dating back to 1892, my property line extended vertically, straight down through the center of the cliff face, ending exactly 6 meters below the floor of the valley, where Marcus was planning to lay his concrete basement. More importantly, because that coastal valley slope was composed of loose, shifting maritime shale, any massive structure built on that incline would experience immense, continuous lateral soil migration. In plain engineering terms, without massive intervention, the entire hotel would slowly slide straight into the ocean. The only way to stop it was to drill high-tension, industrial steel stabilization anchors deep into solid bedrock, and the only solid granite bedrock within 3 miles sat squarely inside the legal boundaries of my worthless, rocky ridge. But there was a second secret, hidden even deeper in my subterranean radar scans. Right at the intersection where my granite met the valley shale, there was an active, pressurized underground aquifer, a natural, high-pressure subterranean water vein that flowed directly beneath his proposed basement floor. If anyone attempted to excavate that valley without building an incredibly expensive drainage diversion network, the hydrostatic pressure would lift a concrete foundation like a plastic toy boat in a bathtub. I closed my laptop, packed my gear, and rented a small, quiet apartment 3 miles down the coast. I didn't file a premature lawsuit. I didn't scream at my family. I didn't send a warning email to the board. I sat in my room, made a cup of strong black coffee, and waited for Marcus to start digging. If you have ever been pushed out, overlooked, or cheated by someone who thought their money and their social status made them completely untouchable, you need to subscribe to Anonymous Archives right now. Drop a comment below and tell me if you have ever reached that turning point, where you realize that the absolute best way to defeat an arrogant person is to sit back in total, patient silence and watch them build their own trap. Because what my brother Marcus did over the next 8 months is the ultimate warning story for anyone who forgets that a glass castle is only as strong as the hidden ground beneath it. By early February, the construction of the Vanguard crest was operating 24 hours a day, under massive floodlights. Marcus had hired a prominent corporate engineering firm from London to execute the massive structural build. Every single morning from my window, I could hear the distant, rhythmic thud of the heavy diesel pile drivers echoing off the water. I didn't stay away from the site. I wore a plain gray hoodie, walked along the public coastal path, and watched through a high-powered spotting scope. Within 3 weeks, I spotted the exact corporate shortcut I knew Marcus would take. The London engineering firm had originally submitted a blueprint that required 42 deep-bore retaining anchors to tie the hotel's massive concrete foundation directly into the solid rock wall of my ridge. But Marcus was running completely desperate for immediate cash flow. He had already spent over £3 million on a lavish, pre-launch marketing campaign in Dubai and London, and the interest rates on his primary construction loans were beginning to skyrocket by the week. To cut down his operational costs, Marcus ordered his site managers to slash the anchor count from 42 to just 12. But that wasn't his only fatal mistake. When his heavy excavators dug deep into the basement level, they struck the pressurized aquifer I had mapped months ago. Millions of gallons of clear, freezing groundwater began rapidly flooding his active construction pit. The project should have stopped immediately. A legal, highly expensive drainage diversion network should have been engineered around the valley. But Marcus knew that halting construction would cause his international investors to panic. So, he chose the cheapest, most reckless option available on the market. He ordered his engineering crew to drill 12 massive, 6-inch thick, grade 8 hydraulic steel anchor lines, horizontally, straight through the shale slope and deep into the granite wall of Sector 7. Inside those anchor bores, they installed secret, high-pressure drainage siphons, intentionally bleeding all the trapped groundwater directly into the deep, natural fissures of my private rock ridge. Through a hidden data tap I had left active on the site's digital project ledger before I was fired, I intercepted the internal encrypted email Marcus sent to his chief engineer. "The local soil reports are overly conservative," Marcus wrote. "We are wasting millions on water management. We will anchor the building into the ridge and vent the water there. The owner of Sector 7 is a broke technician. He doesn't have the tools or the intelligence to see what's happening under the stone." When I read that email on my monitor, my hands went completely cold. They didn't ask for my permission. They didn't file for a public utility easement. They simply assumed their crime was buried too deep in the dark for anyone to ever find. For the next 5 months, I did something Marcus never expected. I collected data. I purchased 3 high-sensitivity acoustic emission sensors and planted them deep into the rock face of Sector 7. Every time his drills bit into my granite, every time those heavy steel cables were tensioned, my sensors recorded the exact frequency, the exact micro-strain, and the exact depth of the structural intrusion. I watched through my binoculars as they poured thousands of tons of reinforced concrete over the anchor heads, sealing them away from human eyes beneath layers of imported stone and structural backing. By June, the main tower of the Vanguard crest was completely framed out. It was a terrifyingly heavy monument to human vanity. 12 stories of reinforced steel and thick, floor-to-ceiling glass paneling pressing down on a sliding shale slope. The entire weight of that 45 million pound structure was now pulling on those 12 illegal cables, and those 12 cables were anchored exclusively inside my land. On July 10th, I took my complete digital data log, my original 1892 maritime deed, and a comprehensive 3-dimensional subterranean survey mapped by an independent firm, and walked straight into the High Court Enforcement Registry in Bristol. I didn't want a standard civil lawsuit that would drag on for 5 years in corporate mediation. I filed for an immediate ex parte injunction for subterranean encroachment and illegal hydrostatic liquid discharge. Under British property law, a landowner's rights extend down to the center of the earth, unless a specific public commercial easement has been legally purchased and registered. Marcus had registered nothing. The High Court judge spent 3 hours reviewing the acoustic logs, the radar charts, and the explicit internal emails I had printed out. I sat quietly in the courtroom, wearing a clean gray suit, my hands folded in my lap. The judge finally looked up from the documents, his face pale, looking over his spectacles directly at me. "Mr. Cross," the judge said, "the structural data you've presented here suggests that this entire building is actively dependent on your land for stabilization, and they are utilizing your property as an unmapped, unpermitted drainage reservoir for an active aquifer." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "That is correct, Your Honor. They explicitly told me the land was worthless. and then they used it to anchor their fortune. The judge didn't hesitate. He slammed his gavel down. He didn't issue a warning letter. He didn't grant Marcus a grace period to negotiate. He signed a master structural mandate authorizing the immediate physical clearance of all foreign infrastructure from Sector 7 at the owner's sole expense, effective immediately. I took the stamped documents, walked out of the courthouse, and hired an industrial demolition crew. If you are waiting for the exact second when the Golden Boy's glass castle starts to shatter under the weight of his own criminal negligence, make sure you are subscribed to Anonymous Archives right now. Share this video with someone who has been cheated by a toxic family member or boss, because we are about to enter the opening night gala, where 300 wealthy international investors are drinking champagne, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet is about to be legally cut away. August 15th was the official grand opening night of the Vanguard Crest. The weather was clear, but the Atlantic air was biting and cold. From the top of Sector 7, I could look straight down into the glowing heart of the valley. Huge, powerful searchlights were sweeping across the dark ocean sky. A live jazz band was playing on the heated outdoor terrace, and the local television networks were running a live, prime-time broadcast directly from the marble-floored lobby. Marcus was in his absolute element. Through my spotting scope, I saw him standing in the center of the VIP lounge, wearing a velvet tuxedo, holding a crystal glass of vintage champagne, laughing with local politicians and international developers. He was telling reporters how his pioneering architectural framework had successfully conquered the difficult coastal terrain. At exactly 8:45 p.m., a heavy, unmarked white commercial van pulled up to the gated entrance of Sector 7. I stepped out of the front seat, wearing my old high-visibility vest, my steel-toed boots, and my safety glasses. Behind me were two uniformed senior enforcement officers from the High Court and a 6-man demolition crew, carrying high-voltage, industrial hydraulic plasma cutters powered by a massive diesel generator in the back of the van. We didn't walk down the cliff path to join the party. We walked straight to the concrete inspection bunker that Marcus had built at the base of my ridge, the exact spot where his 12 master anchor cables emerged from the solid granite rock face. Inside that damp, concrete room, the 12 thick steel lines were whistling faintly, humming like guitar strings under the immense, terrifying pressure of the shifting 12-story building below. Right next to them, the illegal drainage valves were wide open, spraying a heavy, constant mist of groundwater straight into my rock fissures. I took out my phone, found Marcus's personal number, and dialed. It took him 4 long, ringing tones to finally answer. "Ethan?" he snapped, his voice loud, drunkenly confident over the loud sound of the background jazz music. "Why the hell are you calling me right now? I'm in the middle of the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. If you're calling to beg for a ticket to the VIP buffet, call my assistant on Monday morning. Goodbye." I stood in the cold wind, looking down at his beautiful, glowing glass castle. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly flat, perfectly clear, and completely calm. "I am currently standing inside the master anchor bunker on Sector 7. I am holding a High Court enforcement order for the immediate removal of the 12 steel cables trespassing on my land." He let out a loud, mocking laugh straight into the microphone. "Are you completely insane, Ethan? Do you know anything about engineering? Those cables are under 300 tons of hydraulic tension. You touch them, and the entire slope shifts. You don't have the guts, and you don't have the money to fight the injunction my legal team will file next week." I looked at the lead technician, who was holding the heavy plasma torch over the first steel line. I smiled into the phone and replied, "I don't need to wait for next week. Marcus, the order is already active. Look out the lobby window. Through the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the luxury hotel lobby, Marcus stopped talking. He turned his head and looked up at the dark, looming silhouette of the cliff above him. He didn't see an empty rock ridge. He saw a blinding, brilliant, blue-white explosion of industrial plasma sparks slicing through the night sky. Under the direct, legal supervision of the High Court officers, my demolition team engaged the very first cable. When the extreme heat of the plasma beam hit the core of the grade 8 steel, which was holding back hundreds of tons of lateral soil pressure, the cable didn't just cut smoothly. It let out a terrifying, explosive, metallic whip that echoed across the entire coastal valley like a military cannon shot. The heavy steel cable snapped backward into the concrete bunker, shattering the light fixtures and leaving deep gauges in the solid stone. Deep within the sub-foundations of the hotel, the concrete floor shuddered faintly. Inside the gala, the crystal chandeliers vibrated. The water in the champagne buckets rippled, and the arrogant smile completely froze on Marcus's face. But we weren't even close to finished. Simultaneously, my crew slammed the massive mechanical shut-off valves on the 12 drainage siphons, instantly blocking the escape route for the pressurized groundwater. With no outlet left, the massive volume of trapped water instantly backed up beneath the hotel's foundation mat, building immense, unstoppable, upward hydrostatic pressure against the concrete. "Stop! Stop!" Marcus screamed into the phone, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, primal panic. "What the hell are you doing? You'll ruin the entire structural alignment of the building." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I am simply clearing my land. "Marcus, exactly as you suggested. You have 11 cables left." When the third master tension cable snapped, the combination of the shifting shale slope pulling forward and the rising water pressure lifting from below caused the grand marble floor of the VIP lobby to audibly crack down the center with a sound like tearing metal. The hotel's internal seismic monitoring software instantly triggered an automatic, red-level structural emergency. The fire alarms began to scream throughout the 12-story glass tower, and the automated emergency lighting kicked on. Inside the gala, the crystal chandeliers began to swing violently. Water from the rooftop infinity pools began pouring over the glass terraces, and 300 of the city's wealthiest investors dropped their crystal glasses and completely trampled each other to reach the parking lot exit in total, blind, unadulterated panic. By midnight, the chaos had cleared, leaving the Vanguard crest completely dark and silent. The city building inspector arrived on site with 3 structural engineers and an armed police escort. After running a cursory inspection of the cracked foundation mat and the severed anchor points, he issued an immediate, permanent condemnation order on the entire structure. Because the building had lost 25% of its lateral slope stabilization in a matter of minutes, and the basement was actively lifting due to the unmanaged aquifer, it was declared an immediate public safety hazard, entirely unfit for human occupancy. To fix the structural alignment, Marcus would need to completely buy out my land at whatever price I demanded, or re-engineer the entire valley foundation from scratch, costing an estimated £15 million. But Marcus didn't have £15 million. The opening night disaster was broadcasted live on the nightly news, causing his primary international investors to completely withdraw their credit lines within 48 hours. The commercial bank immediately called in the master £45 million construction loan, and Cross Developments crashed into involuntary corporate liquidation by the end of the month. The brand Marcus had spent 11 years building was completely erased in less than 30 days. He tried to file an emergency lawsuit against me for intentional sabotage, but the High Court dismissed the case before it even reached a judge. The ruling was simple. You cannot sue a landowner for removing equipment that you illegally placed inside his property to hide a criminal engineering shortcut. Marcus had built his entire empire on a foundation of lies, and he had finally run out of ground. 2 weeks ago, the bank held a private, closed-door asset auction to recover whatever remaining value they could from the empty, condemned concrete shell on the cliffside. The mood in the auction room was dead, somber, and quiet, because no sane development firm in the country would ever buy a building that had no legal right to anchor its own walls into the surrounding stone. There was only one single bidder sitting in the back row of the room. I bought the £45 million luxury hotel for exactly £180,000. Where did a fired surveyor get that kind of liquid capital? Marcus had assumed that because I lived in the mud, I was broke, but he forgot that for 5 years. I had been quietly running an independent geological consulting firm on the side, licensing my proprietary subterranean radar software to major mining conglomerates across Europe. I had more than enough money to buy his ruined castle. Yesterday morning, I walked into the old corporate headquarters of Cross Developments one last time. The high-backed leather chairs were gone. The computers were packed away, and Marcus was sitting alone in the dark office, packing his cheap marketing trophies into a plain cardboard box. His face was completely hollowed out. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his hands were trembling. He looked up at me as I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of pure, burning hatred and absolute defeat. "You planned this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "From the very day I signed that severance over to you, you knew the math." I stepped forward and set my new master structural blueprint down on his empty desk. "I didn't plan your greed, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice quiet, steady, and level. "I just calculated it. You thought that because you were the loudest person in the room, you were the one holding up the castle. You thought my silence meant I was weak. But you forgot that the world doesn't run on marketing, and it doesn't run on velvet tuxedos. It runs on the foundation." I turned around, walked out of the office, and left him alone in the dark, empty room. If you are ready to build a life on solid ground, where the data never lies, make sure you subscribe to Anonymous Archives right now. Stay quiet, stay precise, because the truth never needs to shout.